Morgan Peters, and I'm here with Betty Weibel. We're from Ohioana, and we are so happy that Euclid Public Library reached out to us to present this program on the Ohio Literary Trail. We're so excited to talk to you all today about it, give a little overview of trail stops that you all can visit in the northeast region of the state, as well as we're going to talk a little bit about the state in general. But first of all, I'm just going to talk just a little bit about Ohioana and who we are. And we'll talk more about this towards the end of the slides as well. But Ohioana, we're a nonprofit literary organization located in Columbus, Ohio. What we do is we celebrate Ohio authors and their literature, as well as preserve their work. So we have a collection of books by Ohio authors as well as books about Ohio. And we honor our authors in programs such as the Ohioana Book Festival and the Ohioana Awards. And again, I'll talk about that in a bit. But for now, I'm going to kind of let Betty get started and talk a little bit more about the literary trail and what that is.
Thanks, Morgan. As Elise said, we do plan to take some questions at the end. So if you have any, just type them into the chat section and Elise will be fielding those. And again, thank you to the Euclid Public Library for inviting us today. I'm excited because the Ohio Literary Trail shines a spotlight on Ohio's role in shaping culture and literature worldwide. And it features more than 70 landmarks. And if you look at the map on your screen that's color-coded, you'll see the trail lives right now on the Ohioana website. And you can later print this out. You can download it. So don't worry about notes and how am I going to keep track of everything. Morgan and I plan to focus our talk on Northeast Ohio, but also take you on a virtual tour of some of the highlights of other regions of Ohio. Ohio is divided into 5 regions, and we didn't make this up. It's known as the 5 Ohios because we have 5 incredibly distinct geographic areas with major metropolitan areas, and they each have their own makeup. And if you look at the map, you'll see it's color-coded, and the regions of Ohio are definitely distinct. We've broken it out by counties as well. And on the Ohioana website, ohioana.org, the map also has links to each of the sites. Again, you don't have to worry about that right now, but later it'll be a nice reference for you. The map is composed of a number of literary sites in each region, and they pay tribute. There's about 70 different landmarks, and they pay tribute to Ohio authors, poets, illustrators, libraries, and creative influencers of the written word. It's a digital trail map, and I think that you will enjoy it because it's a perfect time to look at this during this crazy time in life and this pandemic, and you think, you know, where can I travel? Well, a lot of these wonderful sites are in your own backyard and you don't have to go very far. And hopefully we will introduce you to some things you didn't know. It's designed for novices as well as seasoned literary fans. And it's something you could just take a quick drive if you need to get out of the house and take a break from being cooped up, or you can plan a multi-day excursion to different parts of the state and literally go on a treasure hunt of Ohio's literary landmarks. You will see on our tour as we take you, there are a number of stops and they are divided, there are varieties. Some of them are only indoors and they're museums and literary sites within libraries and historic homes, as well as some landmarks that are markers. And Morgan will show you an example of that with the Harriet Beecher Stowe House in Cincinnati. This is an example of a historic home and museum, as well as what I'm talking about with the literary landmarks. And it's a actual bronze plaque that is displayed. Some of the sites on the map are only a library and some are only a museum. Harriet Beecher Stowe House actually is everything in one, and that's why I wanted to show you this. Some of them, of course, are closed right now, and you'll want to check the websites and see what the hours are and if they are even open. And sadly, we know so many are closed. However, it doesn't mean that you can't visit right now because, and I'll share some examples of that. These markers, there's more than 50 literary landmarks markers on the trail map. And they're set up so that you can drive by, you can walk by, and I think that you will enjoy some of the wonderful history that you'll be learning in your own backyard. Like I said, Harriet Beecher Stowe is an example of a historic house, museum. We have some of the stops on the trail that are libraries, and about 50 of them are literary themed markers that are hosted by the Ohio History Connection, formerly the Ohio Historical Society. And these are very special because they've been designated in communities by the people who live there. And there's an enormous sense of community pride with these markers. They've gotten behind selecting the location, and they're public locations, in most cases, like I said, outdoors, that anyone can go and visit. On the map, you'll see we give you locations. In some cases, there's not an address, it's a GPS coordinate. It might say it's the north end of a parking lot for these markers, but what a wonderful way to go exploring and finding some of those things, like I said, in your backyard. As an example, the other day, I decided to go and check out the Hart Crane literary landmark. And I drove to nearby Garrettsville. I hadn't really looked at the marker before. So I stopped and my daughter and I looked at it, and I learned that Hart Crane was a poet. Now, I'm not a literary expert, and I learned a little bit about him. Interestingly enough, he was born in Garrettsville, Ohio, and his father was the founder of Lifesavers Company. So, I mean, who would have thought such a fun little tidbit of information? Lifesavers Candies, his father Clarence had been the inventor, and he had written a famous poem about the Brooklyn Bridge, and it uses that as a metaphor to celebrate contemporary urban life. So I looked at the marker and didn't go inside anything. There was no home there. In many cases, there's nothing left of history other than the marker that designates what happened in that spot. But while I was there, we drove around Garrettsville. It was a great diversion. We looked at a bookstore we hope to visit one day, and some restaurants, and the wonderful mill that's in the middle of town. And it was just a fun getaway. So you'll see as we walk you through some of these sites, we invite you. You don't need them to be open. You don't need an excuse to visit. If you only have a few minutes, you can drive by and take a look. And if you want to make a day of it, you can piece together your own itinerary for the Ohio Literary Trail or use ours. So what we're going to start with, and we're going to focus on Northeast Ohio. And if I can kind of walk you through the map of Northeast Ohio for the Literary Trail, it's, as you know, Ohio is, believe it or not, one of the most central locations in our country. It's within a day's drive of more than 50% of North America's population. And we, living in Ohio, are fortunate that we can drive from one corner of our state to the other in about 5 hours. So within one of these regions and within our counties, you're only talking about an hour's difference of a drive maximum for some of them. So it makes it very convenient. Northeast Ohio, for some of you who are from outside our area and aren't familiar, it starts from the center, Lorain County, and heading to the east towards Pennsylvania. You'll go through Cuyahoga County, all the way to the Pennsylvania border in Ashtabula County. Northeast Ohio heads south and goes through Portage and Stark County, and all the way down to Richland County. and a number of other counties in between, as you can see by the map. So as I said, it's our intent to show you a few highlights right now of Northeast Ohio, and then take you on some of the other highlights of the other regions of the state. So you can sit back in your armchair and go for a virtual tour of some literary landmarks. Morgan and I are going to get you started, and she's going to start with Lorain County.
Thanks, Betty. As Betty said, we're going to start in Lorain. There's, of course, Lorain County, and then you have the city of Lorain. And the next couple of highlights I'm going to talk about, they're both sort of located in that city area, as well as the county at large. So the first highlight we're going to talk about is an author named Helen Steiner Rice. We wanted to mention her because she's maybe a bit less well known, but it's really kind of a household name. So Helen was born in Lorain, and she would become a pretty prolific poet and advocate for women's rights in the workplace. So her marker is located in the city of Lorain in a park called Lakeview Park. And it's like the marker that we showed before, the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. It's a very similar looking marker to that. And so when she was born in the very early 1900s, she became an adult around the time of the flu epidemic, which she lost her father to. So that's why she got her first job at the Lorain Electric Light and Power Company. And then later, when she moved to Cincinnati, she worked for the Gibson Greeting Cards Company. And so that's what kind of started both her poet career, as well as that work I mentioned before in advocating for women's rights in the workplace. So a lot of her work, a lot of her poems can actually still be found on greeting cards today and in books. President Jimmy Carter and his wife were huge fans of her. And she was, in 1992, she was elected into the Women's Hall of Fame. So you can see her marker there on the right in the park. That center photo is Helen. Sorry, it's a little grainy. And then some of her greeting cards are there on the left. And so next we're going to talk about another very famous resident of Lorain County, and that is, of course, Toni Morrison. And I'm sure a lot of you know Toni Morrison. She was a novelist, essayist, book editor, college professor, and also winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. So she won that in 1993 for her novel Beloved. And a lot of her work and her novels, her essays revolved around the experience of being a female, or just more so the female Black identity in America. But where she got her start was in the city of Lorain. And that is where Ohioana is actually in the process of creating a formal marker for her. But one place we highlight on the trail is the Toni Morrison Reading Room. And that is located at Lorain Public Library. And it was actually Toni's idea to have that be a place dedicated to her when she won the Nobel Prize. The city of Lorain wanted to sort of celebrate and recognize her, and that was her suggestion, to make a reading room at the public library where people could go to read her books and, of course, other literature. And so the reading room is still there today. It was rededicated in 2020 in February, what would have been her 89th birthday. So just before the pandemic began, that room was rededicated, and it's a special place because that was actually her first job. In high school, she worked for the Lorain Public Library. So I think now we're going to kind of move slightly east to Cuyahoga County and all of the wonderful things that you can find in Cuyahoga County. For those of you who are tuning in from Euclid, you're probably familiar with a lot of these things, there's just a lot of great stuff in Cuyahoga. So I think Betty and I are going to kind of split it up. But I am first going to talk about some things more in the kind of Cleveland area. First of all, being the home of Superman. And maybe not everyone knows that America's most famous superhero was created by two Cleveland natives in around the 1920s. So their names were Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and they created Superman, and he was actually the first superhero to see print. In 1932 is when Superman made his debut, and he is, of course, still one of the most, if not the most famous comic book superhero and one of the most recognizable. So you can see that marker on the very left there. And then in the center, though, we have a Superman statue that is at Cleveland Public Library. So a lot of you may have visited Cleveland Public Library and might know that it's a Carnegie Library. So it was dedicated in 1916 with funds from Andrew Carnegie. And a cool thing about Cleveland Public Library is that it's also home for the Ohio Center for the Book, which is another really notable location for celebrating Ohio literature. The Ohio Center for the Book is the designated Ohio affiliate of the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress, and it's part of a nationwide network of centers for the books. So you can find that at the Cleveland Public Library. You can find big collection of Superman items and all of that good stuff. And then one last thing I want to mention that's located in the Cleveland area, a branch of Cleveland Public Library is what you see there on the right, actually, the Langston Hughes Branch Library, and that's his marker there. So Langston Hughes was an important author, an important part of the Harlem Renaissance movement. He was born in Missouri, but he moved to Cleveland in high school, and he lived there for a big portion of his life. So he wrote plays, he wrote novels, but most notably he wrote poetry. So it's really his poems that he's kind of most famous for. In particular, he was one of the earliest innovators of a genre called jazz poetry. And he had a popular column during the civil rights movement, a weekly column in a leading Black newspaper called the Chicago Defender. So he kind of was all over in all kinds of genres, talking about the experience of being a Black man in the mid-century in America. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Betty, and she's going to take us through some of the other highlights of Cuyahoga County.
Morgan's been talking about some people, and not everything on our trail is person-oriented. And all of the individuals, though, are no longer living, and that was a qualification to be receiving a historical marker. Some of the sites are libraries, and the slides that you see on the outside, the far left and far right, are related to the Oxcart Library. And I thought this was fascinating. This is a marker that's located outside the North Olmsted branch of the Cuyahoga County Library. And according to the marker text, in 1829, the citizens of Lenox voted to change the name of the township to Olmsted because it was part of a bargain to acquire 500 books owned by the heirs of Aaron Olmsted. They wanted to start the first public library in the Western Reserve, and the books were brought all the way from Hartford, Connecticut by ox cart and stored in settlers' cabins. The remaining 125 volumes are now housed just inside the entrance to the North Olmsted Public Library, which is at the moment closed to the public, but the marker's outside. And the books you see on the far left are those, what remains of those books that were brought by ARC's cart all the way to Ohio. So that's an incredible historic display. Another unusual site that we added to the trail is in the center. So this is an exhibit. It's inside the Lee Road branch of the Heights Library in Cleveland Heights. And this pays tribute to Harvey Pekar. Harvey is best known for his graphic artistry and the American Splendor series. And if you're not familiar with Harvey, he spent countless days at this library researching and writing, and it's a tribute to how important libraries are in all of our lives, but also some of these amazing creators of literature. And this is a great example of the diversity of the literary trail and Ohio's contributions. Harvey's efforts raised the level of the comic book to a recognized genre. The statue you see on that desk is actually, the entire display is the exhibit. And it's really unusual. It was donated to Heights Libraries by his widow, and she was a local, and she worked with a local artist to design this exhibit. It's a sculpture, and the base of it is actually the wooden desk. And you can sit down at the desk, you can open the drawers, you can write and create. Inside the drawers are some special memorabilia from Harvey, including his old ID when he was a volunteer at the Veterans Administration. He worked as a file clerk there. And the statue is actually, that's Harvey coming out of an image of a comic book, a graphic art display. So if you see the base with his leg, he's actually stepping out of the page. I thought this was an incredibly unusual exhibit, and it was dedicated to the library in 2012. You can't go inside the library right now, but you can drive over to nearby. An incredible place is Lakeview Cemetery on Mayfield Road. And you can see at the entrance, they have a map and you can find Harvey's grave there. And it's amazing because people pay tribute to him by putting their pens in the earth all around his stone. And that's an amazing place to walk around outside and get a little fresh air if you want something unusual. But I wanted to share these two unusual historical displays with you. Morgan?
All right, I think now we have a couple more places moving on from Cuyahoga and moving over into Portage County. We have another couple of locations, and these are both located on Kent State University's campus. And there's a lot of great locations, of course, around Kent State. And I'm a graduate of the library science program. And so they really love literature, but just a couple of places that we wanted to tell you about. First of all, on the left, the picture you see of the garden, of the park, this is called Poetry Park, and it's part of the Wick Poetry Center. The really great thing about it is it's one of those locations that you can visit even despite the pandemic, because as you can see, it's outside and it features these really great rotating displays of illustrations, poetry illustrations that are designed by Kent State students. And as you can see, it's very beautiful in the spring and summer. And of course, I'm sure it's maybe, there's not quite as much foliage right now during the winter months, but it's so cool to walk around and see the illustrations. And the Wick Poetry Center itself has been engaging emerging and established poets and poetry audiences for about 35 years now, with digital tools, readings, publications, workshops, and more. And I know some of those things are probably being offered virtually at the moment. It's always worth checking their website just to kind of see what they're up to. And then the other location that we're going to talk about here at Kent State is the Reinberger Children's Center, which is located on the third floor of the main KSU library. And it's really sort of an homage to children's literature and um, children's spaces in libraries or school libraries. And it contains a history of children's publishing, including historical books, and it's even been used as sort of a demonstration setup space to kind of show how children's spaces can be designed in schools and libraries. So that's just a couple of those really neat places at Kent State. And now I'm going to hand it back to Betty.
Heading down to the center of Northeast Ohio in Stark County, this pillared home, the Haynes House Underground Railroad Museum, is in Alliance, Ohio. It's operated by the Alliance Area Preservation Society, and it is right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's fascinating museum, and the website has a lot of information about it. It's truly a local treasure, and it's been the setting for nonfiction and historical fiction works on the early Underground Railroad history. Haynes House was operated as a station on the Underground Railroad in the years before and during the Civil War. And we forget that Northeast Ohio played an important role in that Underground Railroad, not just Southern Ohio. When it's open, visitors can see the restored rooms, including the Victorian parlor, a 19th century kitchen and bedrooms, and the attic where fugitive slaves were hidden. They have a lot of changing historical displays that highlight local preservation as well. Members of the family were actually members of the Western Anti-Slavery Society, and that was the largest abolitionist organization west of the Alleghenies, and several of the society meetings were held on the Haynes property. Alliance was actually a hotbed of abolition. And you just, again, the history is right there. You can reach out and grab it. I took a drive with my daughter last weekend. We wanted to check it out. We drove by, and it's not always just the actual location that's part of the tour. A lot of it's the area around it that's worth visiting and taking a look and seeing the setting for this home and how it's truly just one of a home in a neighborhood. And while we were there, we drove around Alliance and discovered some other fun things. Who would know Alliance had the Troll Hole Museum? And I'm not kidding, it was so fun. It was a coffee shop, gift shop. You could go in, you book tours of the Troll Museum. And yes, the little trolls, and they even have the Troll Football Hall of Fame display in the museum. So the Ohio History Connection, part of its mission is to spark discovery of Ohio's stories. And that's exactly what this trail is doing, hopefully, is sparking your discovery of some of Ohio's fun sites. Morgan can tell you about a few as we head farther south to Richland County.
All right, and I'm really excited now because I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite places on the literary trail, and honestly, one of my favorite locations in Ohio in general, and that is Malabar Farm. And you can't talk about Malabar Farm without talking about Louis Bromfield, who created and lived there. And if you don't know about Louis Bromfield, he was born in Mansfield in the very late 1800s, 1896 to be exact. And he would go on to become a famed author, conservationalist, and farmer. So he spent some time in France in the 1930s, so he was away from Ohio, but in 1939 is when he purchased 3 exhausted farms in Pleasant Valley, Ohio, which is near Mansfield, and that would become what is known as Malabar Farm. Still today, he put a lot of love and work into Malabar Farm. He restored it, and it became where he was to do a lot of his writing and a lot of his conservation work, and also where he hosted a lot of visitors, thousands of visitors, famous visitors. One famous example is the wedding of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, which was held at Malabar Farm. So if you visit there, if you have been there, you'll see why. It's such a beautiful and picturesque location. There's so many hiking trails all around there. There's ponds, there's hills. It's just amazing. And so you can kind of see why Bromfield was so passionate about water conservation, soil conservation, and why he spent so much of his time writing about that and educating the public about it. And so the farm today, and that picture on the left is kind of a more recent photo of the farm. It remains the only working state-owned and operated farm in Ohio. So you can visit there now. Some parts are not open. For example, they call it the Big House where Bromfield and his family lived. It's a 32-room farmhouse. I believe it's closed at the moment, but in non-pandemic times, you can of course have tours, but even now you can go and hike those amazing trails. You can go in the barn and see the cows and pigs and chickens and all the farm animals, and you can see some of that farm equipment that he had and that he used. And it's just a great place to explore. There's plenty of little bed and breakfasts around the area that you can stay at for your visit. As I said, just a really cool place. One of my favorite tidbits is that part of the Shawshank Redemption, the very beginning of the movie, was filmed at Malabar Farm and a little cottage that's on the property. So definitely recommend that. And then the picture that you see on the right is of a place called Oak Hill Cottage, which is down the road. It's near where Bromfield grew up. He played there. It's set in the yard. And as you can see, it's a really cool building. It doesn't look much like a cottage, but it's called Oak Hill Cottage. And it has a lot of his books on display now. So when it's open, you can wander inside and see his novels on display. And in general, it's also used as a museum that kind of highlights Victorian life and the Victorian era. And now I think we're going to, before we talk about the book fairs, Betty is just going to kind of touch on some of the other counties that we didn't really have time to talk about.
Well, when you go to the Ohioana website and look at the map, you'll see that we have a few other literary historical landmarks that are in Geauga County. Trumbull County has a few, as well as Lake County. And we're going to leave those right now behind so we can take our tour to the rest of the state and share a few highlights. But before we do that, it's important that you find a way that you can connect with Ohio's wonderful living writers and all the great authors that are available today. And these book fairs that Morgan will talk about gives you that connection for the authors of today.
Right, exactly. People love to connect with their favorite authors, as Betty said, and thankfully, Ohio is home to a lot of really great book fairs and book festivals. And you might ask, what is a book fair? What is a book festival? If you haven't been to one. And essentially, most of them involve a sort of author-reader interaction. So typically you can expect to go to a book fair or a book festival to meet authors, purchase their books, get a book signed by them, and maybe even attend some panels or lectures by the authors or see some children's programming. It's really across the board, and most of the time these are free events or donation events, and they're always a lot of fun. But of course, the one that's sort of in the northeast neck of the woods is the Buckeye Book Fair, which is held in Wooster. And it's typically held in the fall. this past year, because of the pandemic, it was held online, and they had about a week of programming, which was really cool. And you could, of course, still buy books. And maybe it will be in person again this year, or maybe they'll end up doing it virtually again. But either way, it's a really great event, and I've been to it a lot of times and really enjoy it. And then there's other book fairs and festivals that I will just quickly talk about. There's essentially one, pretty much whatever corner of the state you live in, you aren't far from a yearly book fair or festival. Of course, the one that's very close to my heart is the Ohioana Book Festival, and that's here in Columbus. And it was virtual last year, of course. We had it in August, and this year it will be in April, and it will be virtual again. And the dates for that are April 23rd to 25th, and we'll have that on the last slide. But it's essentially going to be that last weekend in April, and you can see a picture there on the right of the last time we had it in person. So you can see some authors interacting with readers, and just a very crowded floor, people buying books, having fun. So that's what it's like. And there's a lot of programming and panels as well. In Toledo, you've got Claire's Day, that also was, it was actually canceled for 2020. I don't believe they've decided how to move forward in 2021. We spoke about Buckeye Book Fair. Spring Literary Festival is what you have down in the southeast corner of the state in Athens. That was also canceled last year, and I don't think they've made a decision for 2021. And finally, Books by the Banks in Cincinnati, and that's typically held in the fall. And it was postponed last year, and I believe they're either moving forward with a virtual festival this year, or maybe hopefully they can have it in person. So that's the very, very quick overview of all those great book fairs and festivals. And I think with that, I think, Betty, we're moving right into kind of talking about highlights in the rest of the state. And I'm actually going to let you talk about Northwest Ohio.
So in the upper corner of the state, Toledo, Ohio, has this wonderful library collection. The Toledo Lucas County Public Library is home to the largest collection of Nancy Drew themed artifacts from writer Mildred Wirt Benson. She was the original Carolyn Keene 90 years ago. And the slide you see all the way on the left, that's Millie, and she's standing next to a sculpture of Nancy Drew. And you will also see here the beautiful, one of the display rooms. This wonderful person, Jennifer Fisher, had an amazing collection of artifacts she collected over many, many years. And she felt that they should be shared with the public. And she partnered with the library to create these amazing rooms and rotating displays of all of her collection. And it's on the second floor of the Children's Library. I haven't been yet, but I can't wait to go. It looks like you're walking into a scene from Nancy Drew with original cover art and the paneled walls. It's just elegant glass bookcases. You can wander around and see the furnished collection space. Nancy made her debut in 1930 in The Secret of the Old Clock, and Carolyn Keene was the pseudonym for Millie Wirt. Millie passed away in 2002. She was a young Iowa-born writer, and she was hired by the publisher to write the first books in this series. And it was his idea to create this 16-year-old character and detective who would solve mysteries in each of her books. Millie really brought her to life, though, even though it was the idea of the publisher. And Millie wrote the first 23 of the popular mystery novels. The last one she wrote was The Clue of the Velvet Mask. And I hope some of you are nodding behind your cameras, remembering these wonderful books. Millie was a columnist later with the Toledo Blade for more than 50 years, and she was married to the editor at the Toledo paper, and she passed away at the age of 96. Altogether, she wrote about 135 books for young readers, but the Nancy Drew series is probably her most beloved and famous. The trailblazer, independent young woman was inspired and motivated everyone, generations of readers, from first ladies and US Supreme Court justices and entertainers to people like you and me. So this is definitely worth visiting when you can get up to Northeast Ohio. I'd count it one of my top highlights. Another highlight, the Clyde Museum, lesser known Sherwood Anderson. Before I started working on putting together the trail, I wasn't familiar with his work, although a photo of him is on display in Key West at the Ernest Hemingway House. Sherwood influenced many writers back in the day. And in 1919, he published his most notable book, Winesburg, Ohio. It was a fictitious work, but it was about small town Ohio, and it inspired a new generation of writers to write in the realism style. So he's credited with starting this realism style of writing. And Clyde, Ohio has a museum that has a lot of other items from Clyde, but a section on Sherwood Anderson, as well as his historical marker, is located there. Clyde influenced him. He grew up in Clyde and other towns in Ohio, including Camden and Elyria. But Clyde is where he grew up and experienced the Midwest, and he was relatively poor upbringing. So that influenced him. So a lot of the characters, while he says they're fictitious, when Winesburg came out, it was a scandal and the town was very outraged because they did happen to see some of themselves in the fictitious characters, apparently. But years later, the town embraced him and celebrates him every year. And people will come from around the world to visit Clyde, Ohio, and walk around the town. Again, it's not just the museum. You want to walk around the town and see what influenced the writer in his day. So that's very special in Northeast Ohio. And I'll just give a shout out to the Mazza Museum at Findlay University, which has the largest collection of children's art. And it's an amazing location as well. So when you visit the literary trail map, check out the Mazza Museum. And when you're up in Findlay, take a drive over that way. You'll see beautiful roads and back roads in Northwest Ohio and discover some of what influenced these authors. Morgan?
Okay, so moving a bit south, but sticking to the central part of the state, my neck of the woods, around the central Ohio and Columbus area, we have quite a few really great locations that I want to mention. And I am going to be starting out with Ohioana Library Association. Our physical location is in downtown Columbus, and you can see our reading room there on the left. So we've been working from home since last March, but when we're in the office, we always love having visitors. People come in to see some of the great materials we have. So you can kind of see through the windows just a sneak peek of our vast collection. And like I said, it's all books by Ohio authors or about Ohio. I talked about us a little bit, but we do have our yearly book festival. And then in the fall, we have the Ohioana Awards, which is another big program where we honor authors in a number of categories who basically just yearly fiction, book, nonfiction, and so on. So we give out those yearly awards. In the center, that is actually the Wagnalls Memorial Library. So you actually have Thurber House the right, but in the center is Wagnalls, which is just east of Columbus, in a little town called Lithopolis. And Wagnalls is a really cool place. It's a fully functioning public library, but it's housed in this amazing Gothic architecture building. It was actually called the finest Tudor Gothic structure in America by Success Magazine in 1924. So it's a little bit different than the other public libraries we have in Central Ohio. But they do have a circulating collection. They have a night that's, or like an event kind of thing that's focused on the Great Gatsby, and people get dressed up, and it's just, it's a real gem of our public libraries here. And like I said, if you visit, there's lots of fun places to see in Lithopolis as well, and just east of Columbus. And then finally on the right, the Thurber House. So this is another location located in Columbus, and it's a center that is dedicated to the literary arts, but it gets its name from James Thurber. And some of you might have heard of James Thurber or know of him. He was a journalist and a novelist who studied at Ohio State. He wrote The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, for example, and he drew a lot of famous and pretty recognizable newspaper cartoons. So he was a cartoonist as well. And now Thurber House, it's a building that he lived in while he was going to Ohio State, and they now host workshops and classes and youth programs that are all sort of dedicated to the literary arts and celebrating literature and Ohio authors. So those are just a few of the places in Central Ohio, and now I think Betty is going to take us down to the southern part of Ohio.
In the southwest corner of the state, you could literally spend a week just visiting literary sites around Dayton and Cincinnati, the historic home of Paul Laurence Dunbar, the Mercantile Library, Harriet Beecher Stowe House. Amazing rich literary history. One of the places I'm looking forward to visiting is the Rankin House, which you see over on the left. And you see a little bit of those steps, which are incredibly important. Rankin House is located on Liberty Hill, and it overlooks the Ohio River. It's an original stop for slaves on the Underground Railroad. And those 100 steps led from Ripley to the house on the hill, and they're still accessible today. It's a National Historic Landmark and an amazing site, and I highly recommend visiting. Reverend John Rankin was a minister, and he built the house. And because it's so close to the river, they hosted probably about 2,000 of the escaped slaves who traveled through Ripley, and they were proud that they never lost a passenger on the Underground Railroad. His family included 13 children. And Rankin wrote a series of letters to the editor of the local newspaper articulating his anti-slavery views and denouncing slavery. And one of the people who was inspired by his preachings was Harriet Beecher Stowe. In fact, she heard his account of one slave who carried her child across the icy Ohio River, and she later included it in her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Very different site I wanted to mention in the center slide and the right, I discovered when researching was the McCloskey Museum, and it's located in Heritage Hall in Hamilton, Ohio. And some of Robert McCloskey's beloved children's books, Make Way for Ducklings, Lentil, and Homer Price, are incredibly heartwarming stories that are still popular today. There's a park at Heritage Hall right outside, and the statue you see is a character from his first book, Lentil. And many of the scenes in McCloskey's book that he wrote and illustrated are from Hamilton. Like Ripley, the town is very important when you visit the site, and Ripley offers a lot of lovely tours of the town. It's a charming town. So is Hamilton. And as you walk around the town, the library and scenes around the town, you can find on pages of his books, especially Lentil, where he wrote in 1940 and talked about a young boy much like himself. Inside Heritage Hall, there's a number of McCloskey displays, including all of his Caldecott medals and his the medals that he earned and awards for his writing, the Caldecott and so many other awards. But the thing that I found charming was on the second floor is a display. In his Homer Price book, he writes about a donut machine, and the kids just love the imagery of a donut machine hammering out donuts. And there's an actual donut machine on the second floor that children love to visit. And the tour of the town is charming as well. And that's Southwest Ohio. If we head the other direction in the southern part of the state, Southeast Ohio, there's some amazing spots. This is the least populated section of Ohio. And when we put the trail together, we wanted to make sure we included sites from around Ohio. And this lovely area of Ohio and Appalachia gave us some great sites. The site all the way on the right, Zane Grey, I'll start with backwards here. There's a museum that's part of the Ohio History Connection. And it's actually 3 museums in one. If you look on TripAdvisor, you'll see great reviews for this museum. It includes the Zane Grey Museum, the National Road Museum, and a third museum. Zane Grey, right here in Ohio, from Zanesville, Ohio, he's the father of the Western novel. He's the person who wrote countless Westerns and was inspired. There were more than 60 books. His most famous, Riders of the Purple Sage, was in 1912, and it was probably his best known work, but a lot of his Western novels were made into movies in the 1920s and 30s, and they were incredibly popular. So if you get a chance, you want to swing by this museum, there's also a literary historical marker for Zane Grey. His name was really Pearl Zane Grey. And his marker is in the parking lot of the museum in Norwich, Ohio. So, and not far is the Annie and John Glenn Museum as well. So Zane Grey Museum has his study and a number of displays. And then you'll also see a display for the National Road, which was US 40, Main Street of America. And it was America's busiest road connecting the East Coast with the Western frontier in the early 19th century. So in that part of the building, it's one facility, but that part of the museum has a Conestoga wagon and a 135-foot diorama that shows the progression of building the National Road. Another section of the facility is dedicated to glass and pottery art, which was an incredibly big form of art in the Zanesville area, and a lot of companies were major producers. So I highly encourage you to visit that museum in Norwich, Ohio. Another part of the Southeast Ohio that I wanted to touch on isn't a traditional literary site that you might expect. But when we put this together, we wanted our trail to have something for everyone. If you take your family on a trail, chances are somebody isn't going to be really into museums and libraries, but you might have an outdoor enthusiast. And that's why we included this section of Hocking Hills called the Grandma Gatewood Trail. And this is incredibly special. You see how beautiful Hocking Hills is. And Grandma Gatewood, Emma Gatewood, was an Ohioan, and she isn't an author or a poet, but she inspired many, many books, and her story is fascinating, and that's why she's included on our trail. The middle book by Ohio author Michelle Houts is for children when Grandma Gatewood took a hike. So Emma Gatewood was the first woman to hike the entire Appalachian Trail solo. And that trail runs from Georgia to Maine, but a part of it comes through Ohio, which some people didn't realize. And about a 6-mile section of the trail in Hocking Hills is dedicated to her because she used to go there very often and hike that area. The entire trail is 2,050 miles. Chances are many of you are not interested in hiking it, but if you wanted to get a little feel of what she saw and did, you could head over to Hocking Hills and hike that section of the trail. It gives you an incredible feel for how beautiful the natural landmarks are. It includes Old Man's Cave and Ash Cave, and it has amazing forestry and natural landmarks like the waterfall you see in the bridge. She was an inspiration not only to writers and seniors and other hikers and women, but later it was revealed that she was a victim of spousal abuse. And that was a reason she spent so much time hiking, was to get away. She had 11 children. And in 1955, at the age of 67, that's when she hiked the Appalachian Trail. So if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what does, and earn her a place onto our trail. So I did want to point that out to you when you go back to the website and visit our map and see the entire map as a whole. We wanted to share a few of the many, many sites around the entire state and encourage you to explore. You'll also find some special trails that are dedicated to children, and they are listed as well. We're going to go to questions in a minute, but I wanted to mention to you that a little bit of this information we've given you, we realize there's a lot of information to this, and you could focus and explore on your own. But because there was so much interest, we decided to create a travel guide for the Ohio Literary Trail. And I authored that. It'll be released in May of this year by Arcadia, the History Press Publishing, and the proceeds benefit Ohioana. So look for that later this year. If you want full details of every site and more, you will find that in the travel guide. But for now, please, we encourage you to visit the Ohioana website and take a look at this entire map and all of the sites that you will see on the trail. But Morgan, do you want to add anything before we go to questions?
Yeah, definitely. And I noticed that we are at 3 o'clock now, so I think we may not have time for questions. We definitely want to be respectful of people's time. We know that this was set to end at 3, but I want to very quickly mention that if you have follow-up questions, or if you want to be added to Ohioana's email list, please just email us at ohioana@ohioana.org. And we will add you to our email list. We'll answer questions, and we'll get you any information that we can. I wanted to,
Elise, yep.
I just wanted to, one more quick reminder about the Ohioana Book Festival, April 23rd, 24th, and 25th, which it will be held virtually on our website. So you'll be able to see all of our panels, everything on there, and we'll have our full author list coming either later this month or in February, and we'll have our schedule coming up. So just keep looking at www.ohioana.org for all of that information. But I wanted to say one more time as well, just a thank you to everyone for attending, and you can go ahead, Betty.
Just to add to Morgan, and we'll let Elise decide if we need to wrap up and stay to that, totally up to you. But as you look over the entire Ohio Literary Trail, you may say, why isn't this site on there? Or I can think of a great site you should add. And we would love for you, if you have sites that may not have made the trail, feel free to email us at that address that Morgan gave. This is definitely a trail that will be updated. There are sites that I did not realize some of the markers have been removed or damaged and are no longer on there. So it's we've had to replace a few of them. So definitely feel free to give us your feedback as well. And back to you, Elise.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we are out of time. There were several questions, and I'm thinking that maybe, and I have all of those questions, but maybe we can email the responses. So, I mean, I have time, but like, I, want to be respectful of everybody's time as well. So, if you're okay with me emailing the questions to you, and I certainly can email those back to everybody who has asked. And
Elise, I would just add, I saw a couple floating by about Virginia Hamilton. She's already on the trail. We only touched on a couple of highlights. This is just a small percentage of the 70+ sites on there. So check out the full map. You will see, and you can go on the website and read the entire historical marker from Ohio History Connection.
Okay, thank you so very much, Betty and Morgan and Ohioana Library Association, and for putting this together and the important work that you do. So, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Elise. We hope we sparked everyone's desire to discover more in their backyard.
Thank you.